as well, whatever that means. But Jane Hart, I've heard her speak several times now, and she will be talking today on learning in the workplace. She's from this organization here, and she lives very close to us, I found out today. It lives in Bath. So without any further ado, please welcome Jane Hart. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me here today to talk to you. And it's going to be something different probably from what you've had over the last few days, because I am going to be talking primarily about how learning is changing in the workplace. I'll talk a bit more about what I'm going to say in a minute. Let me just say a little bit more about myself. Steve has already introduced me, and as he says, you probably do know me, well, hopefully you do know me from my website, the Centre for Learning Performance Technologies. If you haven't seen it, I try to share there lots of things about what's happening in the world in terms of new technologies and tips and tools and all kinds of things. And it's my kind of like brain, really, where I find things and I just put them on the website and share them. And I blog about them as well. And of course, you may well have known me for Twitter as well. And I try to have a fairly regular presence on Twitter with new ideas and tools and so forth. But in my real day job, I actually do other work as well, rather than having an online presence. And I'm both a consultant, a speaker, and a writer. But I guess it's essentially my consultancy work which drives a lot of my thinking and my work and what I share. And I work both with business and education. I should say I actually taught in a FE college and then a university for 14 years, up to about 97. So I still feel like I have quite an attachment to the education system, of course. And so my work with corporates primarily and non-profits, I try to sort of match the two together. So I've been working since 97 with organizations, businesses and education, helping them understand new technologies, adopt them in the organization, help people, not just with learning, but generally working, new tools for working, new approaches for working. So I'm a kind of like ahead of the game, really. I don't really do sort of what's sort of standard anymore, but help people move things on. And I also work internationally with a group of people. We call ourselves the Internet Time Alliance. And you might recognize some of these faces here. On the top left-hand corner, we've got Jay Cross, who's from California. On the other side of me is Clark Quinn, who's also from California. And then we have Harold Jarkey from Canada. And then Charles Jennings, who's from the UK. Well, actually, he's an Australian, but he lives in the UK, and he used to be the head of learning for Reuters. So we work together. We're kind of like a community of practice. We have huge contacts with large numbers of people around the world who are learning teams, learning professionals who are doing new things. So we're working very much with the early adopters and finding out what is happening. And I'm going to share with you some of the thinking today. Most of us have written some sort of book, and I know you like books, so here are some of our books that we've written. Jay, probably very well known for his informal learning book, which is a good few years old now, but still well received within particularly the learning development world. Mine is a self-published book of my thoughts about social learning. It's primarily about social learning in the workplace rather than in education, but I think people still find it quite useful. Clark, who's an academic, has written more about educational type things, and his latest one, the Mobile Academy, is actually quite an interesting one that's just been released about the use of mobile technologies. And up there, that green one is actually one we call Working Smarter, where there's a collection of our resources and posts and articles that the Internet Time Alliance has written over time. And that one, just like Social Learning Academy, available through the self-published resource Lulu. Anyway, today, what I wanted to talk about is, as I said, what's happening in terms of workplace learning. And I'm going to focus on sort of 4 areas. First of all, how individuals in the workplace are using new tools, particularly social tools, to address their own learning needs. And secondly, how organizations are perceiving these new social technologies. that will then start thinking about how organizations begin to rethink the whole approach to workplace learning because of these influences, these new changes that are happening. And then finally, just at the end, some thoughts perhaps on the implications for education. Now, during this event, I'm going to be trying to make it fairly interactive through Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, I'll be asking a few questions, and then hopefully, if all the technology works, we'll be able to feed them back into my presentation. So I'll let you know when the questions come up. So to get started then, we're looking at how individuals use social media in the workplace. And I wanted to begin by, first of all, thinking about my top 100 tools list. And I'm sure many of you know that every year for the last 5 years, I've asked learning professionals around the world to submit their top 10 tools for learning. And last year, there was about 531 people. They're not just workplace learning people, they're academics as well, from education, from primary education, higher education, workplace, all kinds of things. So they submit their top 10 tools. And from that, I then create the top 100 list. Actually, also create a presentation, a slide set, which I make available on SlideShare. And I'm pleased to know that up to now, since November, last year's one's now had nearly 400,000 views on SlideShare. So I think it's something that people like to have as a resource. So it's obviously quite a useful tool, but let's get back to what actually it shows, because I'm sure if you have seen it, you will know very well that the tools that appear on that list are primarily online, free, social tools, and Twitter turns up to be the #1 tool. And if you look down the list, there's hardly an enterprise tool on the list. I think Moodle, about 8, comes out at fairly high up. And then in terms of corporate tools, we don't get anything really down. In terms of paid for tools, we get down to Camtasia and so forth. The other tools are tools that people are just choosing to use, not only for teaching and learning, but also for their own personal learning. And these tools are very easily accessible to them, and they're just making the use of it. People say to me, well, that's got nothing to do with learning. They're just ordinary general purpose tools. And I think that is the beauty of this, because quite clearly what people are doing now is using personal tools in a very professional environment. I'm sure many of you are using some, or if not all of these tools in the same way. And so over the last 5 years, I've noticed this was an increasing trend. So whereas 5 years ago, maybe tools like PowerPoint and Word and other corporate or enterprise or paid-for tools were higher up the list, now they're moving slowly down the list. The content development tools are moving down. We've got primarily social tools, tools that support much more social activities, whether it's for personal learning or for teaching. And so when I talk about this, people say, well, that for 530 people is not enough for you to make such statements like that about the way people are changing their practices using the tools. But actually, my findings have been borne out by other organizations. In fact, last April, Forrester Research in the US reported that around 47% of business users were actually working around their IT departments as frustrated workers work around IT departments to self-provision technology. And they reckon that was going to go up to 60% by the end of the year. Now, I haven't seen up-to-date figures, but I reckon it's roughly around that figure. People are using their own tools, devices, iPads, iPhones to do exactly that, to actually find the things they need because the enterprise technology just doesn't serve their purposes. Now, that's a well-known phenomenon, as you know. That's called the consumerization of IT. And organizations, as we see, we're going to begin to think about what the impact for them is. But actually, around the same time, another article showed that, and this was in a CLO magazine, that's a Chief Learning Officer magazine, that between 1/3 and 2/3 of your employees are actually meeting their learning and performance needs by working around you, and you as the learning and development department. So not only are they just using the tools for working, they're actually going out and solving their own learning and performance problems by finding their own tools. And that, some people are actually calling is the consumerization of learning. People now can actually more easily use tools like this to address their own needs. So, question for you from Twitter, and I'll have a look at it in a minute. How has the use of these tools impacted your own professional life? Not just in the classroom, not just teaching, but your own professional life in terms of working, learning, acquiring new information. If you want to tweet it, it's something, an answer, I'll pick it up in a minute. But in the meantime, I want to show you my thoughts on what's been happening here. Because when I talk to learning development departments about this, they say, oh no, it doesn't happen in our organization, or oh no, it's only the young people who do this. But actually, my research and investigations of what's happening means that it's not actually just young people who are doing this. We're all doing it. It's just happening quite quietly and subversively in many organizations. People are just getting on with their own thing. Clearly, people are web savvy. You know, they know how to use the tools. But the key things about them are they are fairly committed, dedicated people, motivated, who want to do the best they can. And they're looking for the right tools to help them do just that, because their enterprise tools are just not providing them with what they need to do the task. So looking at that, I then was able to identify 8 key features of what I called the smart worker, because I think that could be summarized, a person like that, as a smart worker, somebody who's actually using the tools to work harder, smarter. I mean, that's the word everybody uses now, isn't it? Smarter. So let's use that term. So here are the 8 features that I think make a smart worker. The first one is quite clearly the smart worker recognizes she learns continuously as she does her job. Traditional way that people do their job is they're trained to do things and then training takes place over time. But in fact, research shows, and it's quite clear, people know that they're constantly learning. Training might be an important part for them, but it's not the only way to learn. They learn just as much by sitting at their desks doing their job, whether it's just reading a document or just carrying out their daily tasks, as well as conversing with people, overhearing conversations, having more structured meetings. All of that is learning. It might not seem like learning in the traditional sense of studying, but it's still learning nevertheless. Some people say that that's more sort of messy learning because it's about acquiring lots of bits of information, having to put them all together yourself to actually start working on it. But those random pieces of information or overheard conversations are just an important part of learning. And in fact, in the workplace, probably take up 80% of what we learn. And it happens in the workflow. It doesn't happen in a classroom or someplace outside of the workflow. It just happens as we do our jobs. It happens through content and people, by interaction with people. And what's more, it's quite clear from looking at the way people are working, is that many of them don't actually have the time or the inclination to take training courses. They actually rather see them as a waste of time. Certainly, time out of the workflow is a problem for them, either sitting at the desk, working through a 3-hour online course or whatever, or having to go and sit in a classroom somewhere. The time out of the workflow is important for them. And in many cases, what they need to do is have immediate access to solutions to their problems. They don't want to have to study a problem just in case they need to solve it. They want to have access to their solution when they need it, to solve it and get on with their jobs. And for that reason, in the workplace learning, they don't go to their LMS, the learning management system, to look for courses or whatever to solve their problems. They go to the social web, they search Google, and they use resources that they find out on the web, YouTube and so forth. And they're doing that just by themselves. Rather than go to their L&D department, their IT department, they just go and do it. And what's more, they are happy to share what they know. They're happy to then give back what they know. Our smart worker doesn't hold or hoard the information, but shares what he knows in the same way, using the very same tools. And I'm sure you've seen this infographic recently that explains exactly the amount of activity that's happening on the internet in a minute. We've got down here YouTube, 30 hours of video uploaded, 1.3 million video views. So in amongst that, it's not just a lot of trivial nonsense. There's actually, for many of these people, very key resources, performance job aids that help them do their jobs. They just go out and search for it. That's probably a couple of weeks old now, and it's probably already out of date, because we know that the rate of information is changing very, very quickly. But I talked about content up to now, where our smart worker goes to find content on the web and so forth. But in reality, in the workplace, our smart worker probably actually asks somebody. If you have he has a problem or she has a problem, she probably asks somebody. In the olden days, 5 years ago, it would have meant asking the person who sat next to you at the desk or in the same office or whatever. Now, of course, they have access to a wide range of trusted friends and colleagues through their online networks and their communities. I don't know about you, but if I have a question or I have an answer, I go to the people I trust who I've brought together in my own personal network. In education, we call it personal learning network. In the workplace, we often call it personal knowledge network. But essentially, these are the people we trust to help us answer the problems. And I constantly see questions all the time for people to help with answers to problems. And in fact, looking at the type of things, activities we do on there is we don't just ask and answer questions, we exchange ideas, brainstorm, just generally keep up to date with what one another is doing, and in fact, learning from one another in many, many different ways without even realizing it. And this, of course, is just happening as a natural part of what we do. But in the workplace, it's actually becoming an important way that people are keeping up to date with their jobs, finding information for their jobs, and just getting on with their work and being productive. And it's also clear that smart worker likes to learn best with and from others. She is a very social person, prefers to have discussions with people, both in an informal context and formal context, to brainstorm things, discuss ideas, bounce ideas off, and so forth. That's how they like to learn. Is this somebody learning in a formal context? Is somebody learning in an informal context in the workplace? Or is there somebody just having fun? I think all these things are blending together so much now, it's impossible to tell exactly what is going on here. But essentially, these people are learning from one another. And as I said, this is part of how they learn to do their jobs. Also, it's clear that the smart worker keeps up to date with what's happening in his industry and profession through many ways, not just through access to his online networks. For me, that's a key way to find out what's happening in my industry. I couldn't probably be here talking to you unless I was in Twitter all the time, listening to what people are talking about and doing. But also in other ways by reading blog feeds and from the important people who are talking about new approaches in the workplace. There's just some feeds from my colleagues there. And of course, now we're seeing aggregated feeds and curated content. People are actually trying to filter that content and give me my daily burst of learning, essentially, although they don't call it that. It's just some curated content, but every day I gauge something from that, just like many people in the workplace too. And for me, I couldn't be doing my job without having access to all this stuff, if you like. But it's also apparent that the smart worker doesn't just continuously learn using these tools, that she also constantly strives to improve her productivity. So she's always on the lookout for new tools that are going to help to do something, maybe automate a task or improve a task or even innovate, do things differently. Now, for many people, are outside of this looking on, they often think this is just geekish behavior, must have the next shiny toy and so forth. But actually this is this constant process of trying to improve. And so they will make use of, perhaps just actually look at and see whether these tools have value for their productivity or for their work in any way. And many of these tools can actually change completely the way they work, not only personally, but also how they work with their teams. And finally then, what's quite clear from all of this is that the smart worker thrives on autonomy. He likes to have the choice to find the tools he needs, to learn in the way that he finds most appropriate, to do things himself, to make the choices himself. And I don't know if you've read this book by Dan Pink called Drive. If you haven't, it really is a must-read. It's called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And in that book, Dan Pink says there are 3 things that motivate us. There's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And it's interesting to read. I've only just got a clip here, but in terms of autonomy, which is what we're talking about here, he says a sense of autonomy has a powerful effect on individual performance and attitude. And you don't actually give people autonomy, because that's still like you being the sort of master. People are autonomous. But in terms of workplace learning, this is really key, because control leads to compliance, autonomy leads to engagement. And in the workplace, up to now, what we've been trying to do is create a compliant workforce. But now we want to create an engaged workforce. That's the trendy term. So we need to think, if we think about engagement, we're moving from controlling types of behaviors, telling people how to do things, when to do them, and what to do, and treating them like, well, say like small children, but even the small children now are probably more autonomous than many people in the workplace. But we need to think about how we can provide that level of engagement that we seek to have in our workforce. So let's see what you've said. This is where you can, I'm going to refresh. This is my Twitter stream coming in here. I'm going to refresh it and see what we've got coming in here. This is where I find out what you've been saying about me. I should have warned you I'm going to search for the screen. So I haven't seen anything about anybody doing anything. Let's go down the list a bit up. See if we can find. This is where the mouse doesn't like to work too well over this. Here we are. Oh, let's just try and refresh it there. Well, smart worker. Do you recognize yourself as smart workers? I guess many of you are. You're doing all this stuff. You haven't just thought about it. You're just doing it as a natural part of your job. You don't see it necessarily as learning or working, but you're learning all the time. I'm sure many of you realize that. It's just our traditional view of learning, which happens to be in a classroom, is being changed by the ways we're actually now working ourselves. So let me move on then to, this is where it tends to jiggle around a bit. I have to do this, I think. Thinking about what organizations are doing now, how organizations are perceiving all this. We've got individuals already using all these tools in many different ways. How do organizations think about this? Well, I'm going to be using this adoption curve here. You probably know this technology adoption curve that looks at how a new technology is adopted into organizations. We've got the early adopters up front, who the new people who try stuff. And once the masses get involved, it's considered to be in the early and late majority. And then once the people catch up, like 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years down the line, they're considered to be the laggards. And that yellow bit in the middle, Geoffrey Moore calls that the chasm. And actually, for any technology to jump the chasm or cross the chasm, to go from 1 to 3, if you like, is when things become mainstream. So where is the use of social technologies in this adoption curve? I mean, where do you think your organization sits on the adoption curve? If you'd like to say, I don't know, it's going to be displayed for everyone to view in a minute. But do you think your organization is sort of really promoting this stuff, or is it really behind the times? When I've looked at the use of technology by organizations, this is my rough and ready guide, so please only see it as this. The first thing I see is still many organizations banning all access to tools. I mean, absolutely all access to tools. Now, I put it down that area there in the laggards because Gartner said that in 2010, 50% of large corporates were doing this, but it was dropping by about 10% a year. So I reckon it was about 30%, so maybe it's a little bit too far over, and it was going to drop another sort of 10% year on year. But many organizations are beginning to realize the futility of all this. You know, trying to stop people bringing their iPhones into the organization is just ludicrous. So what we're seeing now is this BYOD, bring your own device strategy. Now, within corporates particularly, it's beginning to take off, but I'd still put it over here on this early adopter area, because some of the ones I've seen, it's really sort of like senior people over only, you know, who trusted to do that. It's still not, we're still not trusting our main workforce to bring in these tools and use them, or be seen to use them in the organization. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen, because they still are using them. But the bring your own device strategy is beginning to recognize that we need to think differently about the way we use these tools in organizations. But certainly in the middle section here, social media marketing is become fairly mainstream probably. Organizations often have a Twitter or Facebook presence to promote themselves. I think that's pretty commonplace now for many organizations, universities included. And also within functions, we're seeing ad hoc use of tools at a sort of recognized organizational use. And training, of course, has begun to do this too. It's begun to think, well, we need to incorporate social tools into our training department. But some organizations are beginning to think bigger than this now. They're thinking it's not just about ad hoc use. We need to have some sort of integrated approach to all this. And the next buzzword on the table is the whole concept of a social business, which is about integrating social within the whole working of the organization. And again, I guess that's probably still in the early stages, although IBM is, you know, and many of the big consultancies are promoting this quite heavily with their big corporate clients. But as IBM says, a social business isn't just about having a Facebook page or a Twitter account. It's one that embraces and cultivates a spirit of collaboration and community throughout its organization, both internally and externally. And that actually is quite a difficult thing to achieve, because it's not just about the technology. It's about this whole corporate sense of helping people work together, collaborate, and so forth. But another quote I'd like to show you today, I think really sums it up, because whereas many people are still trying to sort of add social on to existing practices without changing things, this quote shows that being social is not something you just add on. It's not a feature, it's not an application. It's a deep human motivation. And the leading businesses are recognizing the web is moving away from being centered around content to being centered around people. And I think, you know, we assume everything you do. And at the moment, many organizations are not thinking like this. They're thinking, add on social, add a bit of social media into training, and so forth. It's not thinking about a holistic, cohesive approach. So, what are your organizations doing? Let's see if anyone's dared say where they think their organization is in terms of, oh gosh. I can't get the mouse to click on the right place. Here we are. Oh. It just is. There we go. That seems like the last one. Well, can't see anybody who's actually put their finger on it and said exactly where they think their organization lies. But as I say, many still ban all social tools. They haven't quite got their heads around that yet. Bring your own devices. And this whole concept of social business is beginning to come through into many organizations. So the question is then what this means for workplace learning. We've got individuals using their own tools, working around IT and learning and development over here, and we've got this, maybe there's social business pressures from top down saying, well, we need to make this a social business now. So how does L&D support all this? So I've been working with a number of organizations, particularly L&D, who've been trying to think about how they need to change their ways of working in order to support all this new activity that's happening in the businesses. And clearly, it's going to be more than just providing training now on. They're going to need to expand their offerings. In fact, I've been thinking about a number of different overlapping services that need to be included. And for instance, there obviously will always need to be a sort of training element. People still going to need to trained on essential parts of the workplace and key compliance and regulatory elements. But it's also clear that we're going to need to support people's performance in much more detail than we have before. We're going to need to provide access to those on-demand resources. We're going to help people get together and support one another. And also, thirdly, this blue area, which are called the social collaboration area, is about supporting this whole new collaborative working that the social business is going to require. Help people build networks, communities, collaboration spaces. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. There is quite a lot of overlap, as I'll show you in a minute, but there's also going to be a fourth area. Because in the old days, again, managers had problems. They'd come to training and they'd say, I'd need a course to solve my problem. Now, they will need to come and say, I have a problem. Can you help me solve it in the most appropriate way? Which might be a course. It might be some formal training. Don't let me lead you to believe that otherwise, but it might just be, well, we could actually make more performance aids, job aids available, or we could support collaborative working in a better way. So solutions to business problems are not necessarily going to be solved by training anymore. And in terms of activities, as I said, it's obviously going to be about courses and workshops still, but we're perhaps going to expand those into communities of learning, which take place much more in the workflow, not necessarily sitting in a classroom anymore, more coaching, more creation of job aids and repurposing of courseware to make it more manageable, because people tying up all their courses in learning management systems which don't get used is a waste of time and energy. And also supporting all this content creation and sharing I mentioned, and the use of the web, but also encouraging new collaboration practices and helping groups sort themselves out by solving their own problems by setting up communities, perhaps. So this is probably the new way forward, and for many learning and development partners, this is scary because they're actually only used to training people. They're only used to creating courses, creating e-learning. We know, I've seen some discussion. E-learning, let's get rid of that term. It's just made us think about dumbing down everything. We need to open it up again now. And social collaboration for me is quite a key area. People say social collaboration, isn't that sort of like, the same thing twice? But this is Oscar Berg's definition of collaboration. In the workplace, we think mainly as collaboration as just getting a team together and coordinating and acting. But social collaboration is involved with all the stuff that happens invisibly behind that, which actually really is about whether we're productive and we really achieve the goals of collaboration, sharing what you know, making yourself visible. This is all the social stuff, isn't it, we've been talking about. This is the key to real good collaboration in the workplace. So it's not just about, right, get a team together and start working. It's actually bringing those teams together in the most appropriate way. So this is new stuff for L&D. Don't let you think that this is the current state of affairs. This is the way they're having to think now in terms of supporting all these new collaborative practices that the social business is going to ask them to do. So when I show them this, they say, well, we can't do all this. we only do all that stuff up there, but where do we focus all our efforts? Well, one of the things I say is, well, actually, don't do less of anything until you know what problems you're trying to solve. So if somebody comes to a problem, you find the best solution. But I think they do have a point in a way, because these people that are going to support these new activities do need new skills. You know, being an instructional designer isn't probably the right person to sort of create and support communities. There are different skills involved here. Where are they going to need their skill set? Most people in most skill sets. So recently I thought, well, I'll just try a little activity to see if I can find out where people really best learn. So if you've been following this on the blog, you know all the answers, but here we go. So I asked the question, how do you best learn in the workplace? And what I did was I took 10 things from that list I showed you up front of the Sway Social Smart Workers work. Company training, and by that I meant formal learning, you know, in any format, face-to-face or e-learning. Self-directed study, where people could actually go out and choose what courses they wanted to study. The use of company documents, like procedure manuals and all the things that they have supposed to read to do their jobs. Job aids, the things that they would perhaps just find as a task, references and so forth. Collaborative working in their team, whether they felt that collaborative working within their team was the best way to learn by just working with their team. Whether it was a matter of all those professional networks we talked about, external and internal, on Twitter and Facebook and so forth. And whether it was blogging, content created from external sources, or the Google search. Now, only 10 things there. Obviously, many more things that could have gone on the list, but just 10 things I decided to ask the questions on. And so the question was, how important, useful, or valuable are the following ways for you? And I gave them 4 options. Not important, somewhat important, very important, and essential. Now, when I took the snapshot of this, there were only 130-odd responses. But actually, the pattern of responses that I'm going to show you in a minute started very early on, within like 20 or 30, I could see it. And now, the numbers have reached much higher numbers, and the pattern is still the same. So the numbers are not important in that respect. Okay, they are a small number, and that's I'm going to pick up on that in a minute. But it does actually show a pattern of behavior, which I find quite interesting. But before I do that, I thought I'd put you guys on the spot a bit here and ask you the question, some of these questions. Now, we haven't got time to go through more, so I'm just going to pick out a couple of them. So the first one I'm going to ask you is, how important do you think internal training is for you in your job to do your job? Okay? So, in order to vote, you have to do one of these things. You either tweet the number, not important, quite important, very important, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, and then you write training vote after it. Okay? Training vote's got to be in it. Now, if you don't want people to see it, you can put in this dummy account, and then it'll block it out to some of your followers. So then you put, a number should go in there, sorry, as well. A number should go in there, and training vote. So let's see if the thing will work here to refresh the screen. It should refresh automatically if it doesn't, my mouse. Oh, there we go. No votes found yet, so. Has anyone done it yet? Yeah. This is when the technology always fails you, isn't it? There we go. It worked much earlier on today, so have I typed right training vote in there? Yeah. Oh, here we go. There we go. It should refresh after 30 seconds. Anyway, we'll leave it to refresh. So, quite clearly, training is not important. I mean, we are obviously a different audience here than most, and that is the key thing. It's not about, it is contextual. But I'll just see if anything else comes in here. Oh, here it comes. Quite important has risen up a bit. Maybe that's for me, got a few people in from corporates here. Yeah, well, there you go. And that's a good point as well, isn't it? Because that's people say that, well, this is very easy when you can know how to do it. But anyway, interesting there, that pattern, because I'm going to show you now what the result of mine was after 130. The biggest number actually fell in the somewhat important track. And if you look at it, 20% thought it was not important, which is very similar to the results we're getting here. Only a very small number actually saw it as being very important, or even essential even. And quite a few people have obviously been very concerned about this, because this means the work they're doing is not important at all. But anyway, I decided to look at what this meant. I looked at the essential, who'd actually said it was essential. Now, it was difficult to pin people out, but it turned out to be mostly e-learning and training providers that thought it was essential. They actually said they were them. I didn't make that up. They said they were them. There were a few academics and there were a few learning development people, but it was across the board. And down the bottom, who said it was not important? Well, again, it was across the board. People didn't think it was important. And I think that's pretty astounding for people to say that. But interestingly enough, when we asked them, well, how about self-directed study? Look, self-directed study is much more, well, not much more, but more important, more highly rated, pretty much, than training. And when I looked at the study, people are actually paying for their own self-development in order to do the right things that they needed for themselves, because their organizations weren't providing them with the right training or the training that suited them. And I thought that was quite significant. But then we looked at the next one, internal company documents and internal job aids. And actually, I was surprised at this, because it actually dropped. It didn't seem to be as important, these things. I thought people would want to have job aids. Now, possibly there aren't that many available, or perhaps they're not that good quality, I don't know. But it seemed to me that I thought they'd be much more highly rated than training, but there you go. So then the next one was, what did they think about collaborative working within their team? Did they think that was highly rated or not? So that's the one I'm going to ask you to have a go at now. So again, to vote for that, you have to take collab vote with the number in front, or if you want to put this in, and the number, and then collab vote. And we'll see what that happens. So if you think, how important is collaborative work within your team for you as a way of learning in the workplace? Hopefully it'll arrive in a minute. Your connection is very fast here, isn't it? So should. There we go. Oh, I don't know how many voted, but so far it's essential. Maybe it's only one person, but. Oh, it says 10 votes. You're right. Yeah, totally 16 votes there. You're right. Absolutely. 25, very important. Okay, let it go for a bit longer. Working together with your peers it's increasing now. So let me show you what my results showed. Exactly the same thing. Collaborative working with your team was the most. And as you'll see, as when I show the rest of it, that's the highest one, the highest value that appeared in the whole of this thing was this one here, 53%. And look, very, very few thought it was not important at all compared to the training people who thought it was 25% or whatever it was, 20% thought it was unimportant. So we're getting a clear change of views from people themselves about what's important for their own learning. If we take a look at the next four, which is conversations and networks and blogs and feeds, they are still very highly rated. Very few people think that they're unimportant as part of a way of learning in the workplace. And again, those figures quite different from the top figure. And then we've got the bottom, Google search for web resources. Okay, so that's how important using Google to solve your own problems in a way, as I mentioned up front, by searching on the social web. And let's have a go at that one now. So that's the last one, Google vote. And we'll see how important you think that one is. Suspense is killing me. Oh, come on, here we go. Oh. Essential, very important, quite important. Nobody said not important. 14 votes in there. Any more to come in? 20 now. Somebody up there was interested, can't see what that says. 5%, it says 5% there, 5%, 21%, 68%. Okay, they're probably all in now, so I'll just move on. Well, again, that matched my results. I'm very pleased about that. Most people think, you know, it is an essential way of learning, that that's just how they do their jobs. They just learn by using Google most of the time. So I was quite surprised by what I was finding. And okay, we have got quite a small sample again, but what I did then was kind of do a weighted scoring thing to kind of go a ranked list. And if you haven't already spotted it, you know, it's quite clear that at the bottom are these three things. And so I kind of categorized them in three ways: internal documentation and training, social and collaborative activities, and what I call personal learning strategies, and put them in the right boxes. And clearly the sort of like top-down driven resources and training and materials are the least important ways people seem to be learning. Whereas social collaboration activities now considered to be really important and by this sample. So what I would say is that this sample of people, okay, this 131, are clearly social, autonomous, smart workers, which I was talking about. Now, obviously, as we are all, people here with Twitter and are all really used to this stuff, but so this is obviously a very clearly defined audience, but what it seems to me is that organizations can no longer assume they know how people learn or want to learn or should learn in the workplace. We need to be cognizant of this. In fact, organizations ought to be doing this kind of thing themselves and finding out how their people are learning and what kind of ways they want to learn. And rather than make assumptions about it, which is what we've done up to now. We've just assumed everybody is happy with this top-down, one-size-fits-all training come e-learning approach to things, when it's clear that most of activity is interest is in social or could be within knowledge working environments, probably likely to be very social, but also very much driven by personal learning strategies, by people who want to do things in their own way. So that was, if any organization did their own learning survey, they'd be able to answer that question themselves. Where should they place their efforts? Because every organization is going to be different, for sure. This was just a very small little sample, but I think it does show that we need to understand the learners much more and how they are acquiring their knowledge and skills in the workplace. Now, as I said earlier, most organizations are trying to just tap into this. They're adding the social into this bit down here. Well, it seems to me that that's placing effort in the wrong place anyway, if that's not where their organizations want it. So supporting the social collaboration activity is going to be much more important. But I think the key to this whole thing is going to be supporting these personal learning strategies. It's going to be moved from top down training to supporting learning as it's happening in the organization. And I think there are two reasons for this. Firstly, this is where all the innovative and interesting and productive work and creative activities happening. It's happening mostly under the radar, as I've said. We need to kind of embrace that and support it and encourage it, build on it, rather than just sort of ignore it or try to span it even. And it's those people in the corporate environment we need to use to build these social and collaborative activities, because it's not going to happen by us telling people to be social. Something I always say is you can't train people to be social. I said something I'm going to say up later, but you can't train people to be social. You can't tell people to be social. They won't. You can't force people to be social. You can only encourage them and show them the value of it. And the people who are doing it already are the best people to do this. So we need to be tapping into those people and encouraging more autonomous working, encouraging more people to have personal learning strategies. And by personal learning strategies, I mean being much more independent and autonomous and self-directed and supporting people who are. There's clearly many people who already are, but encouraging others who perhaps who aren't already. Encouraging them to acquire the new knowledge and skills they require in the different ways. But for them to choose the most appropriate way to do it that suits their own job role and profession and so forth. So it's not us telling them how to learn when and where, but support them in the different ways they can do that. And these personal learning strategies will require a number of skills, or require a number of elements, I should say. And so I'll just quickly go through those. Harold Jarkey, my colleague in Canada, has, together with me, built some of these ideas, because he does an awful lot of work in this area. But obviously the first one is about taking responsibility and control. That control word, as you see, is probably key to it all. Up to now, it's all been about top-down control. We need to let people have control of what they do in the workplace. And stopping people having control has been to be most where the efforts lies, rather than supporting it. Supporting people to take responsibility for their learning, ongoing, continuously, in whatever way it suits them best. It's also about reflecting and reviewing on their strategies. Life, as Harold says, is in perpetual beta, changing all the time. It's never going to stand still. So the strategies you have last month may not be appropriate next month. So it's going to be a constant state of reflection on what's working for you, reviewing, and thinking about new strategies. It's also reliant on a lot of personal knowledge management techniques and tools. And Harold, as I said, talks a lot about this. This is his slide, is his way of describing it. It's about seek, sense, and share. It's about seeking, looking out for information, sense-making, making sense of it all, and then sharing it with others. So it's not just about personal doing it for yourself and then forgetting about it. This is a whole key to supporting personal knowledge management and collaborative working as well. And in fact, that whole idea of contributing and sharing is probably key to it all. Every individual needs to be seen as a valued node in a network. So they don't just sit there sucking it all in themselves. They have to support one another. They have to be part of that network, sharing as much as they are taking from that network, contributing and sharing. These are all key elements of not just personal knowledge management, but devising personal learning strategies. It's also about getting organized, choosing the tools yourself to do the jobs. It's not about being told what to do in a learning management system or course management system. It's about using the right tools at the right time. Having your toolkit there and ready. But it's primarily in the workplace about getting things done. It's not learning for the sake of learning. It's learning for purpose. Learning is, however you learn, is really not that important. It's about whether you can do your job or do it better. And it's about performance. And that's something that even most corporate learning development partners have lost track of. It's not learning for its own sake. It's about learning to do something. Tracking performance, measuring your own success, knowing when you've achieved your targets, knowing when you've achieved any goal that you've set yourself by learning as a result of that learning. And finally, it's not, as I say, having it managed all from some system or enterprise system. It's about a constant process of narrating your work, narrating your learning, being part on a regular basis, talking about what you're doing and your learning and sharing that with others. So tools like social networking tools, enterprise tools like Yammer and so forth support this whole concept of regularly just updating your team, your project, your group, whatever it is, even your organization, what you're doing and conversing with them, discussing with them. That's the way that sharing takes best place in the organization. So these, again, this is not the normal behaviors that are happening at the moment, but this is, I can see that this, well, we can see this is already happening. We're working with organizations, we're helping them acquire these skills and trying to support them, people, as they begin to struggle with all the new skills and of people managing their own learning and being part of a network and a social business. So I guess, as I draw to a close, the question to ask you, and you may not have the answers now, is how we can support, how education can begin to develop these skills, because these are going to be the key skills in the workplace of the future. People are going to take responsibility, they're going to need to manage their learning, organize their learning, and become part of a network of learners. Enterprises will become connected networks, connected organizations, networked organizations. They will move from top-down hierarchies to what another calls hierarchies when we're working like this. So these are new skills of the workplace of the future. Whilst you think about that, I'll say that, as I said, we've been working with organizations trying to sort of help them see that, and it's quite clear you can't train people to be social. I mentioned that earlier. You've got to get down with them and start showing them how to do this. So it's going to be much more about modeling behaviors, not shaping behaviors, as Harold said. It's about having those skills yourself and showing people how to be collaborative, how to manage their, support themselves and their teams. And I think that in some ways maybe the way that education needs to help move things forward, because we're having to do that work now, and eventually people need to be able to have those skills automatically. Now, ideally that happens within an environment where we can spend time modeling it. The communities I run, I spend a lot of time helping people feel comfortable and moving them forward and narrate their work and narrate their learning and get them confident and comfortable to do this. But sometimes you need sometimes a little bit more structured, and what Harold's been running through one of my enterprises is something called the personal knowledge management sort of workshops, shall we say. We try to keep them not too formal, but there's obviously a little bit of structure around it. But it's clear that even people who think they're very good at managing their learning or knowledge have found some value out it. And they reckon that without any coherent strategy, I was often not persistent in my undertakings. They called it a course. It's not really a course. This course gave me an excellent opportunity to evaluate my position, to work out an appropriate approach. It also looked at, I used a time tracking tool to get a feeling for how much time I spend on seeking, sensing, and sharing. So reducing my seeking and spending more time sensing, converting things to high quality content is my most important job in the next few months. So these are all skills we've all got to sort of learn. I'm having to acquire them myself. This new era is bringing a whole new requirement for new skills from all of us. So that was just my thoughts on the future. I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts, probably haven't got time to pop them in the chat here, but well, there we go, see if anything's come out. But I think all of us have got a big part to play in bringing on the future workforce. And in particular, I think education has a huge role in supporting those, building and developing those new skills. And actually, if you look at that picture now, the snapshot you first saw, which looked like the workplace, was actually in education, was in a training room or a corporate room. But these people are supporting their own skills, and then working in the workplace, they then become engaged, productive members of the workforce. So I'm going to finish there. I think I'm about up to time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jane. Let's thank Jane for that excellent presentation. I particularly like the voting system. I've never seen that before, but I think